You've written a book and now you're in that dreaded stage of self-edits. A viewer requested a video about this, and while editing is so involved that I'm not going to get into everything because this would be a very long video, I do have some advice to make self-edits easier. So without further ado, here are my 5 tips and tricks when it comes to self-editing. Starting with number 5, we have the dreaded there, and there. A lot of people struggle with this, and I would like to show you an easy way to remember which is which. Now, there's not really any easy way to remember THEY''RE. So we're going to focus on the other two, and that one is just the final one. If you focus on the other two, you should know how to use that one. THEY''RE is they are, or there. They are going swimming. They're going swimming. Just a little example. Now, if you take the other two and look at them, you have THERE and THEIR. Looking at these words, I can show you a very easy way of remembering which is which. THERE has the word here in it. HERE. This means that you use this word when you are talking about a space. There is a book. The car is over there. Simple enough. Now, when you get into THEIR, that's where things kind of go south. This is to show possession, or rather, ownership. How do you remember this? 2 simple ways. First, there's an I. If there's an I, that must mean ownership, as in, I own it. The second way is to notice that the word heir is in there. HEIR, meaning his heir, her heir, the heir to. This is also showing ownership, or rather, future ownership. Some examples when you use this word are, it is their property. They are using it to show their emotions. Always ownership, always possession. I mentioned there's no easy way to remember THEY''RE. There have been some tricks kind of floating around the internet, including using the apostrophe as a arrow, as in you're taking the A out of R. It's not really foolproof, and it's a little confusing, quite frankly. So if you remember the other two, THERE and THEIR, then THEY''RE is just the final one. It's the one that it does not mean what the other two mean. Make sense? Number 4 is one that really trips up authors, especially first-time authors, and it's very understandable. We're talking apostrophes, or possession. Now, apostrophes can be used in contractions as well, but they can also sometimes be used in possession. Not every time, but sometimes. One example when they can be used for both is Amy's. AMY''S. This can mean both Amy is, or it can mean something belonging to Amy. One common example of how to know when to use an apostrophe and when not is its versus its. ITS versus IT''S. Its is possession. IT''S is a contraction, meaning it is. Example, it is blue. It's blue. Example of ITS. The car is using too much of its gas. In that sentence, it is possession. ITS is possession. IT''S is a contraction. This is very confusing and it's understandable. 2 more times when apostrophes are used that can get a little confusing is when a word either ends in an S or is plural. If the word ends in an S, More often than not, it's going to be a person's name, like Chris. You're going to want to put CHRIS'. There should be 2 S's. This shows possession. If you were to use a word like girls or boys, that's plural, so you would want to just put the apostrophe on the end of the S and not add a second S. This is to show the possession of multiple people. Girls' bathroom, boys' hockey team, things like that. When it comes to girls, if you use GIRL''S, this is possession, but can also be girl is. So if it's one girl, you can use it as possession. If you're trying to say the girl is pretty, you can say the girl's pretty, though technically not the best grammar in the world. You're better off saying the girl is pretty. Number 3, commas versus semicolons. A lot of people get semicolons mixed up. Here is an easy way of knowing when to use a semicolon. If you are taking 2 sentences and putting them into one, feel free to use a semicolon. If it is one sentence, but you want to pause, use a comma. Now, I just paused, so should there be a comma? When I pause with now, there should be a comma. When I said now, I just paused, there shouldn't be a comma there. Unless you say, so should there be a comma? Then there should be a comma before so, because you're pausing. If you were to say, should there be a comma, that's a complete new sentence and needs its own capital letter and question mark. So, to recap, if you're going to pause, especially in dialogue, you want a comma. The only time you should use a semicolon is if you want to bring 2 thoughts, 2 sentences together as one. An example of the use of a semicolon is the sentence, "It was trouble. She knew he was bad news." This is 2 thoughts, something being a trouble and someone being bad news, connected as one, because the fact that something is trouble is related to the fact that this person is bad news. It's not something you need to use a lot, but it is something that is handy when you want to bring 2 thoughts together and you don't want your manuscript sounding like William Shatner wrote it. It was trouble. She knew he was bad news. I want to use a period everywhere because it starts to interrupt the flow of your story. It starts to get a little listy. And that brings us to tip number 2. When you're writing a novel, particularly a fiction one, you want the flow to be natural. You want the reader to be able to go through the story and be immersed. You want the flow to be so natural that it feels like it's their story being told, like they could actually place themselves in the story because it's a natural flow. It's not a listy flow. Now, this might get a little confusing because I keep using more terms like listy and natural flow. Here's what I mean. If you take your story, if you take your manuscript and you put each sentence in bullet points and it doesn't affect the flow or the tone of your story, it's listy. This is usually more of an issue with first person point of view, but it does come up in third person as well. But to give you an example, I'm going to use first person. So if you were to say in your manuscript, I woke up. I noticed the birds singing. I got out of bed. I padded across the floor. I went in the bathroom. This starts to sound listy. You can tell in this video that it sounds listy. It sounds like the author is just listing the tasks that the character is performing. You don't want that. You want to flow. You want to say, the birds singing outside the window woke me slowly. Sliding the blanket along my legs, I shifted my feet and pressed them against the hardwood floor. Standing, my bones and muscles ached and cracked. It still sounds a little listy, and that's because I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but you can still understand the difference. You can still hear how much of a natural flow it is rather than just a list of bullet points of what is occurring. And finally, tip number 1. We're talking that horrible phrase, show versus tell. Or to put it in a little bit better terms, description versus depiction. Description, which we often use because it's a natural term, is more about telling us that the woman's dress is red or that the trees are green. It's not depiction, which uses our senses. You want to take all 5 senses if they're applicable to the scene, and you want to use them to kind of draw an image for the reader to see in their mind. So, instead of saying the woman's dress is red, perhaps you could say it was scarlet or crimson or the color of blood. Give something to the reader that will help them actually imagine what shade of red the dress is. There's not just one shade of red. There's plenty of shades of red. And if you want to immerse your reader, you want to be able to provide them with what shade of red the dress is. In that case, you're only using your sight. But say that you have a scene at a dinner. Don't just tell us that the characters are eating chicken. Everybody knows what chicken is. Everybody knows what chicken tastes like. But your reader still wants that experience of stepping into the character's shoes and imagining exactly what's happening. So instead of just saying that the characters ate chicken, tell us that whoever your main character may be stuck her fork and knife in it and butter squirted out, and the gorgeous savory scent of the butter reached her nose, and when she put the piece of chicken in her mouth, it was melting and warm and delicious. And just use your senses. Again, coming off the top of my head here, so I'm not having great examples, but use your senses. Use taste, use scent, use feel, use hearing, use sight. Use all the senses when they're applicable. Again, they're not going to all be applicable for every scene, but you do want to keep them in mind. Of course, you could write these and find out they're a little too many of them, little too much information. Reader doesn't really need to know that the grass smelled like springtime or whatever it might be. That's okay. Write them first, then take them out in edits. Now this video is about editing, so here's the description versus depiction part of editing. Let's say you have an anxious character. Okay, don't just tell us that he or she is anxious. Don't tell us they suffer from anxiety. Actually show them having an anxiety attack or a panic attack, or show their nerves. Their stomach is fluttering with butterflies. Their heart is pounding. Their head is swimming. They feel warm. They're having a hot flash. Whatever it might be, show it to us. Don't just tell us they're having an anxiety attack. As difficult as the subject may be for some people, readers still want that experience of immersing themselves in the story. And I know I use that term a lot, but it's a very important thing you need to remember when you are writing a book, especially when you are editing a book. Immerse the reader. If the reader is not immersed in the story, they're gonna get bored, and that's the last thing any author wants. I hope you enjoyed this short video on editing tips, and I hope it helps when you come to your self-editing round. Now, a little PSA here, people. Please, please, please hire an editor. It can be, at the very least, just be a proofreader, but my personal and professional opinion, you need to hire somebody who will help you with developmental, copy edits, line edits, proofreading, even story structure. You need that person. Even if you are a master in grammar, if you are a college professor in English writing, you're gonna want to hire an editor anyway, because authors are our own worst enemies. And what I mean by that is not only are we judgmental of ourselves, but we have written the story and possibly read the story several times, and when that happens, we miss things. We glance over errors. We stop wanting to make the edits because we've just read the book so many times that it just is not any more fun for us. This is where an editor, and even beta readers, I have nothing against beta readers, utilize them, but get an editor as well. It's important to have somebody that is not involved in the book look it over before publication. That's my 2 cents. If there's anything that you guys are looking for advice on with editing, please feel free to put it in the comments, and either I or another author would be glad to help you. Join me next week when Tuesday's video is about Preptober.